The Slave Who Loved Caviar, a new one-act play by Ishmael Reed, is being brought to you by the Nuyorican Poets Cafe. Dan Gallons is the executive director. The premiere reading was directed by Rome Neal. Tools for Basquiat and Barrel House Basquiat are original music composed and performed by Ishmael Reed. Cast of characters: Detective Mary Van Helsing, performed by Malika Iman. Baron DeWitt, performed by Ishmael Reed. Agent Antonio Wolfe, performed by Robert Mailer Anderson. Young Blood, performed by Brian Simmons. Jack Brooks, performed by Rome Neal. Jennifer Blue, performed by Monisha Shiva. Announcer 1, performed by Laura Robards. Announcer 2, performed by Monisha Shiva. Richard Pryor, performed by Maurice Carlton. Scene 1, on stage, millennial Jennifer Blue. She is dressed in a Barbie millennial style, baseball cap, jeans, Nike sneakers, wears a Marilyn Monroe mask, and is speaking on the phone to her friend.
I can't Halloween party with the girls tonight. No, it's not homework. Are you ready for this? Wait, are you sitting down? You better. I've been invited to Baron DeWitt's Halloween party. Yeah! The social event of the year. Don't you remember? He came to the poetry slam at the Nuyorican Poets Cafe. Yeah, he says that he couldn't take his eyes off me. Yeah. He says that he wants to include me in a performance piece. Yeah, isn't that thrilling? He didn't give any details about the piece, just that I'll have to become used to sleeping in cramped quarters during the day. Yeah, for authenticity. What's my costume tonight? Well, I plan to wear that Marilyn Monroe mask and a duplicate of the dress that she wore when she serenaded JFK at Madison Square Garden when it was his birthday. Who was Marilyn Monroe? She's the actress that Andy Warhol painted, silly. I think like she was married to a basketball player or something. Well, there'll be a lot of older folks there. They'll know who she is. What about Ricky? Just tell him I'm studying tonight. I mean, he's so mature. Well, the Baron is suave and charming and, you know. Besides, Ricky isn't really my boyfriend. We only went out on a date or two here and there, you know. Look, I gotta go. Ciao.
Scene 2, Baron's library. Night, rain, thunder. He's seated in an elegant chair. He is dressed in a tuxedo. On the wall are pictures of bats. He is drinking from a glass filled with a red liquid substance. Antonio, his agent, peeks in.
A detective is outside. She wants to speak with you.
A detective? Why would a detective want to speak with me?
Want me to get rid of her?
No, that would only arouse suspicion. Send her in.
Agent Wolfe exits. Enter Detective Mary Van Helsing.
And who may you be?
Detective Mary Van Helsing, NYPD.
Baron, rising, approaching her.
And what have I done to deserve the presence of your company?
Baron tries to kiss Mary Van Helsing's hand. She pushes it away.
Cut the horse shit, Baron. This is not a social call. I'm gonna show you some pictures. Do you recognize this girl? Her name is Jennifer Blue.
I'm sorry, Detective Van Helsing. I have never seen this girl in my life.
She was last seen at your Halloween party. Her roommate says that you invited her, that you wanted her to perform in a performance piece.
All of my guests were wearing masks. How could I tell them apart? Besides, I'm always inviting young people to participate in my work. Whether they be models or performers, they have to get their start somewhere.
But you must have a guest list. Her name might appear there.
We shred those lists as soon as a particular party is over. Our guests come from the higher echelons of New York society. They insist upon our discretion.
Well, she was wearing a Marilyn Monroe mask and a copy of one of Monroe's dresses, her roommate says. You must have seen her.
Unfortunately, I have tickets to the opera. I have to end this interview.
Either way, the Bavarian government said that you were delinquent in paying property taxes on your castle, that it was overrun with rats, that when they opened the door of your castle, the odor was so foul that several members of the police fainted. They're sending investigators, and we've offered them our full cooperation.
Let them come. I have nothing to hide.
You sure? Well, if you hear anything, here's my card.
Detective Mary Van Helsing exits. Agent Antonio Wolf enters.
What do you think she knows?
Somebody must have tipped her off.
She's on to something. I can tell. The way she looked at me, as though she could see right through me.
Think that she has the gift?
I can call off an investigation if she gets too close. You know, the people who attend our parties are well connected. Some of the most important players in this town. They like their women real young. I have all of their names in my black book. If I go down, they go down with me.
You're the most feared man in town. Nobody has the nerve to cross you, in a manner of speaking.
Scene 3.
No wonder some tribes consider stories to be living entities, personal property to be possessed. Like the idiom, what's your story? Millions of stories have been told since humans were capable of communicating. Some stories are private, like diaries, journals, and memoirs. Other stories are guarded by historians. Some are state historians, and others are historians who are opposed to the state stories that are widely circulated and preserved in the National Archives. The state might view their founders as gods. Outlaw historians, poets, and artists who view the same history differently might be penalized, denied tenure, imprisoned, or even shot, like Garcia Lorca, if they challenge the state's storytellers. Lorca was murdered by fascists because he was a socialist and he was gay. Nat Turner, who led an uprising against Virginia slaveholders, might be viewed by the state as a terrorist, but by Blacks as a hero. Those who monopolize the framing of Jean Michel Basquiat's career might regard him as a pest, a mascot, or a primitive or a drug-crazed, coked-up maniac. Unlike the portrait of Nat Turner framed by William Styron, which was rebutted by Black scholars and writers, it's rare that one counters the image of Jean-Michel Basquiat painted by his enemies, who regarded him as a street urchin, a bum, and a leech. Basquiat was not only a painter, but a filmmaker and musician whose life was the subject of a biopic. According to the New York art crowd, Basquiat's career was made when he began a collaboration with Andy Warhol. But that story has a counterstory. For Americans, who refer to something they call the West, the earliest stories were told by the Greeks. Both Plato and his teacher Socrates were accused of corrupting the youth. Could Andy Warhol be accused of the same thing? Socialite Edie Sedgwick and Jean Michel Basquiat saw Warhol as a father figure. Basquiat even asked Warhol's permission to marry his girlfriend, Paige Powell. But the father was absent when they needed him. After he'd gotten everything from them, Edie's beauty, Basquiat's potency, they were cast aside. When told that Edie Sedgwick might commit suicide, he quipped, "I wonder if Edie will commit suicide. I hope she lets me know so I can film it." Warhol said the same about dancer and choreographer Freddie Herco. He said that he wanted to film Herco's suicide. The Palace of the Dragon Prince and Villanelle by Herco featured a rising star named Carla Blanc. Warhol was a fan of the snuff film. Ironically, he ended up being snuffed. He studied his subjects obsessively. One of his most famous films showed poet John Giorno asleep for 8 hours. As a cult leader, he often humiliated his followers. Taylor Mead was so humiliated after Warhol invited people to see him film Mead's butt when he promised the shooting would be private. Mead said that if Valerie Solanas hadn't shot Warhol, he would have. The shot killed him, but it took a long time for him to die physically. After the shooting, he was said to appear zombie-like. Warhol's interest in Basquiat was bizarre. Wasn't that what the boxing and weightlifting were all about? The posing of Basquiat in a jockstrap. His obsession with Basquiat's dates. His comment that Basquiat's underwear concealed a baseball bat. And what of Warhol's intense interest in underwear? It was inevitable that Calvin Klein and the Andy Warhol Foundation in 2018 would collaborate on a line of underwear that bears Warhol's prints. Losing the affection of the father, Sedgwick and Basquiat became what sociologist Phyllis Chesler would call father wounded. Wounded by Warhol. Both died at almost the same age, between 27 and 28, from overdoses. Warhol could not aid these young people. Though he had a downtown address, he was Madison Avenue through and through. He was at heart an advertiser. He never denied that he was a commercial artist. Ultraviolet, the late Warhol actress and intimate, says, he learned all about screens and multiples and blow-ups and colorization in his days as a commercial artist. He had the soul of a mannequin. Life for him was a series of brand names, logos. David Bowie might have made the most profound comment about Warhol's art, that as a Byzantine Greek Catholic, he was fascinated by icons. Among the icons created by Warhol was Count Dracula. He produced a film called Young Dracula, whose son, Baron DeWitt, was also wounded by his dad.
Scene 4, the Baron's Library. Agent Antonio Wolfe and Baron DeWitt in conversation.
I'm sorry, Baron, but there were no bids on your work at Sotheby's. These days, they can't even sell French Impressionism. The masters.
What is happening? My last bat collage sold for $2 million. Luckily, we had that show at the Met in the spring.
It's been canceled. Blacks are running the Met, the Guggenheim and the Whitney. The CEO of the Met described your work as corny and unwoke. He's a 28-year-old gay black kid from Brooklyn who arrives at work on a skateboard. They've moved the primitive art from the basement to the first floor. Everything else is graffiti art.
But what happened to classical art? Rome, Greece, the Renaissance.
You can't give that stuff away. It's all on eBay going at bargain basement prices. It's happening all over. You can blame the conceptual artists for this. Somebody just paid $102,000 for a banana taped to the wall of a gallery.
That is ridiculous. The banana will rot.
That's part of the conceptual art strategy. art that demolitions, that self-destructs.
What is this conceptual art?
Marcel Duchamp started all of this when he presented a urinal at the 1913 Armory Show.
What?
He was the founding gangster of one of the longest running con games in art history. He wooed naive bourgeois businessmen to pay his liquor bills and put him up in fancy apartments. These patrons were the first of those whom you might call the Duchamps. The urinal that made Duchamp famous wasn't even his. It was introduced to him by German-born poet and artist Baroness Else von Freytag-Lorenhoven. He lied and said it was his. He became famous, while the Baroness is dismissed as weird and strange by male critics and biographers. Yet she's the one who signed the urinal R. Mutt.
So this conceptual art is about signing your name to an object that someone else created?
Yes, they call it ready-made art. Duchamp wanted to sign his name to the Woolworth building.
You mean I've been spending the last 100 years busting my ass, going through the rigorous process of creating a masterpiece, making sketches, buying paint, canvas, cleaning brushes, when all I had to do was sign my name to a work created by somebody else like a scavenger.
That's the trend. The new patrons don't give a shit about greatness. They are not as refined as our usual collectors. They're insisting that the museums make a profit and not just offer excuses for tax write-offs. Pharmaceuticals companies, tear gas manufacturers, owners of private prisons are now footing the bills of museums. Such is the decline in taste in this country that a Chinese immigrant was caught creating forgeries of the masters.
Was he arrested?
No, his forgeries are selling for more money than the originals. Even the art dealers are corrupt. They demand that the painters they represent hand them a kickback of a painting or two. You have painters paying galleries to have their paintings exhibited. Basquiat's former agent, Mary Boone, went to prison for tax fraud. She received 30 months. She spent $800,000 on an apartment renovation and a $19,000 shopping spree at Hermes and Louis Vuitton. No telling how much she pilfered from Basquiat.
We should have remained in Bavaria.
Baron, you wanted fresh blood, not that stale old world type, sluggish, sticky, ancient, artery clogging, as nutritious as a donut. Besides, when someone gave you a show, nobody would show up because of your reputation. Besides, I love this town. Such is the pollution in this city that seldom does one see a full moon. Otherwise, I'd be galloping through Central Park, baying at the moon like some fucking idiot. Ow!
Agreed. You do seem less tense. As for this American blood, it's so invigorating. After my excursions into the night, I return before dawn feeling as though I could do 1,000 push-ups.
Your state of health is excellent, but your assets are dwindling. You're almost out of money you got from selling your English property.
What do you advise that I do?
Find a black graffiti artist who would be your collaborator. That was Andy Warhol's solution. He was made to look as though he were relevant at a time when hip-hop began to take over American culture. Jean Michel Basquiat gave him, figuratively, a blood transfusion. Maybe that's why he admired your dad. In fact, Warhol created a Dracula image on a silkscreen. Dracula biting a girl's neck.
I told you never to mention my father's name. And that Bram Stoker, I found you with that book, that awful book, Bram Stoker. He was, how does the song go? Papa was a rolling stone. He left my mother and me scrounging around for inferior blood, the blood of peasants, while he gallivanted among the rich, charming ladies and duchesses with his old world style. Rumor has it that he settled in Rio, is very happy there, lives in a mausoleum side by side to some wealthy woman that he turned. At night, they terrorized the residences of the rich, carrying off debutantes. He signed his castle over to us. Maybe as a result of a guilty conscience, we wanted to turn it into a bed and breakfast, but it was in such a state of deterioration that it was about to be condemned.
I've heard this story 1,000 times. What about the collaboration, Baron?
I would never collaborate with a graffiti artist. I'd be lowering my standards.
Scene 5.
With his cave allegory, Plato anticipates the invention of film. The shadows of individuals who pass in front of a fire are projected against a wall. Prisoners view these images as reality. Andy Warhol was one of Plato's prisoners, instead of Plato's philosophers who freed themselves from epistemological bondage, even though Warhol wrote a book entitled The Philosophy of Andy Warhol. For him, images were reality, while his life was unreal. He viewed reality through a Polaroid. But in some ways, Andy Warhol was more like Plato than any figure of the ancient world. I imagine Plato to be an icy individual, like Warhol, someone who didn't like to be touched, shy, as cold as a Tennessee cave, sexless. Warhol said that sex on the screen was more interesting than sex between the sheets. He regarded sex as work, a person obsessed with cleanliness, perhaps a result of his upbringing, who harbored a dirty secret which he carried to his grave. He constantly complained about Jean Michel Basquiat's unhygienic habits, commented on his body odor, his lack of bathing, yet Warhol attended downtown sex dives where brown and golden showers were practiced. He was obsessed with Basquiat's having sex with white women. It's not enough that downtown white males, so favored by the New York art scene, believed that any woman of any background was available to them. But white women who engaged in a relationship with a black male had to be debriefed as though they were members of a cult. Warhol wondered whether Paige Powell, who was in a steady relationship with Basquiat, had recovered from him. Asked whether he would have sex with Basquiat, Warhol said he was too dirty to have sex with. Warhol described Basquiat's living quarters as a pigsty. Yet, at one point, Warhol's factory reeked with the smell of urine, and he and his associates created piss paintings. In his The Life and Death of Andy Warhol, Victor Bacchus dismisses Jean-Michel Basquiat as a nuisance who smoked a lot of pot. Yet Warhol was a meth addict, which accounted for his loss of weight at the time of his gallbladder operation. Was Jean-Michel Basquiat merely a nuisance?
Warhol was a sickly child whose only contact was with his mom and a Charlie McCarthy doll for one summer. Maybe that's why he anticipated a time when humans would marry non-human entities. Like Aja Rita Eklat Berliner Mauer, she married the Berlin Wall in 1979, and Erika Eiffel, the Eiffel Tower in 2007. In 2015, Floridian Linda Ducharme announced that she was in love with Bruce, who is a Ferris wheel. And when Bruce was in bad shape, she, like a good wife, donated $100,000 for his restoration. In 2016, Zhang Jiajia created a robot, named her Ying Ying, and married her. In 2012, Babylonia Ivaz vowed to love and cherish a Seattle warehouse in front of a crowd of 50 onlookers. In the late 1950s, Warhol said he began an affair with his television set, but eventually married his tape recorder, which he called my wife. I'll bet that Plato was in love with the Parthenon.
Your standards don't pay the mortgage, Baron. You have to have a huge bankroll in order to live forever. We get us one of those black kids, a graffiti artist. He could be Basquiat to your Warhol.
That is out of the question. An artist of my stature? A student of Rembrandt. Someone who was on first name basis with Rubens, Steen, and de Hoch, collaborating with a hip-hop artist.
Well, Western artists go black when they become bereft of ideas. Picasso copying African art, Piet Mondrian's Broadway boogie woogie, Rimbaud and Henry Miller calling their books nigger books, Stravinsky and Gershwin writing black music. It will pass. It's like a cyclical kick. But for now, you have to pay the bills, the lavish parties. It all adds up.
Something to think about.
What about the girl?
She's having trouble sleeping during the day in such, shall we say, cramped quarters. I told her that she will adjust to the new normal. I got her here by promising her a collaboration. She'd be my partner in a performance piece talking about innocent. Now this detective is showing up, asking questions. A black woman with a Dutch name.
The Dutch were the first slaveholders in New York.
Didn't know that.
How does the girl taste?
Incredible. Her blood has that extra fizz. She is an archetypal American girl next door, the cheerleader whom you see at football games. But I think that the cleaning woman has been snooping around in the basement where we rest during the day. I have requested a new cleaning woman. I think the present one is a police spy. She speaks Chinese when I'm present, but I caught her making a phone call. She was sitting in a chair. She had her feet propped up on a stool. She was smoking a cigarette. Her favorite soap opera was on TV, and she was speaking perfect English. But when she saw me, she switched back to Chinese. She's probably the one who tipped off the detective.
We should dispose of her?
No, I'll fire her.
But suppose she tells.
Who? Well, take a Chinese cleaning woman's word over mine. Not only a baron, but a white man. Yet, you want me to collaborate with some street scum. Listen, if she makes trouble, we'll do with her what we did with the rest.
What's that?
If she goes around spreading tales about what goes on in this house, we put her in the Bellevue.
But you have more pressing needs than that. You hook up with a hip-hop painter as Warhol did. You can pay for the maintenance of this townhouse. Pay me. There's a boy named Youngblood. He is inspired by Samo.
Samo.
S-A-M-O. Same old shit. It's the group that Basquiat belonged to. They went about on the Lower East Side, drawing graffiti on buildings and painting on postcards.
So what if I did collaborate with this younger blood? What would my job be?
You'd insert icons into the paintings of Youngblood.
Icons? Are you crazy? You know I have an aversion to icons.
Secular icons, brand names, the stuff you find in grocery stores. You insert one of their brand names into paintings done by him. That was Warhol's job. Basquiat says that Warhol was lazy. He did all the work, like on the plantation. Like the slave master, Warhol reaped the results of his labor.
Is that all? I have to paint brand names in paintings done by him?
As simple as that. Feed him caviar and cocaine. That's how they treated Basquiat. That way he'll work 24 hours a day and be very productive.
Let's do it.
The relationship between Andy Warhol and Basquiat was more like that between a primatologist and a creature than one between two painters. Brings to mind those faded sepia images of company towns in the 1930s, where the workers were not only exploited by the bosses, but had to pay the bosses rent. He spent more time observing Basquiat's comings and goings, his dining habits, than contributing to their paintings. He was a voyeur for whom the lives of others were more interesting than his own. Warhol took copious notes about those individuals who fascinated him. An heiress named Taxi, for example. No wonder Basquiat at one point said that he was treated like a monkey, or as one artist said, his contribution was intuitive primitivism. Of his reviewers, Basquiat said, "They're just racists. They have this image of me, wild man, monkey man, whatever the fuck they think." But aren't the signs of a primitive that of aping things? Warhol made his reputation at duplicating the creations of others. When he was asked to respond to critics who said that he wasn't original, he agreed with them. When asked why he copied others, he said, "It was easier." People were amazed that the two so different would become collaborators. Basquiat included strong Black militant references in his work. Warhol interviewed Nancy Reagan and worked for the Shah's brutal fascistic peacock throne. Basquiat fought injustice. Early on in Basquiat's career, a young Black aspiring artist and model named Michael Stewart was caught drawing the words Pir Nema on the subway. The NYPD allegedly used his face to break the window of a patrol car. He was beaten and strangled, went into a coma, and later died. When Basquiat found out what had happened to someone so like himself, a beautiful Black artist who'd scribbled on the city's surfaces, he drew black skulls all night. He made a painting called Defacement, cartoon cops. Some of his images, the brazen, angry skeletal faces. Was he inspired by Miles Davis? Charlie Parker? Maria Callas? No. These paintings sound more like Earl Bostick, Illinois Jacquet, Big J. McNeely, Arthur Prysock, Dizzy Gillespie, Art Blakey, Ben Webster, Lewis.
Scene 6. On the street, homeless Black man, Jack Brooks, enters pushing a grocery cart. Young blood enters from the opposite direction. All he wears is a jock strap and a bicycle helmet. Jack Brooks speaks as they are about to pass each other.
"Hey, young man, can you spare $1? I haven't eaten breakfast, dinner, or a lunch for that matter."
Wait, aren't you Jack Brooks?
Young blood hands Brooks a $10 bill.
"Oh, yeah, the same."
Yo, you were big back in the 60s. But what happened?
Abstract expressionism went out of style around 1968. That's what happened. We were hit with a tsunami of conceptual art, graffiti art, earth art, installation art, animation, and other upstarts. People wanted paintings with people in them again.
No, I never understood why you black guys went for that abstract style of art. Art with no feelings, no passion, no humanity. The chilly white aesthetic, all form and no feeling. Can you imagine someone being moved to tears upon viewing a Clifford still?
Our world came to an end October 31st, 1962. It's the very first show of the original 7 pop artists. Warhol, Lichtenstein, Rosenquist, Siegel, Wesselman, died in Indiana. The abstract expressionists were done. It was Halloween. Look, abstract expressionism was the only way that the white galleries would accept us. Our only ticket to the big time. Now, what were we going to do? A lot of us got our start doing political art, but then there was a backlash on political art. Museums stopped displaying us, collectors stopped buying us, and we were in a battle royal over which of us would be accepted. It was like an earlier form of black on black crime. It was like the hip version of the auction block. You see, in New York, to be successful as a black artist, writer, or playwright, you need a white individual or organization to sponsor you. So just as we settled in with abstract expressionism, these white folks changed up on us again. With no warning, they started pushing this department store art. Andy Warhol and all these people who learned their techniques working in Macy's and Gimbels. There was room for a few black abstract expressionists, people who sold out, but the rest of us were forgotten.
Well, that won't happen to me. Baron DeWitt, he asked to collaborate with me. This is an honor.
They're going to do to you the same thing that Warhol and that the bunch did to Jean Michel Basquiat. Killed them with dinner parties, drugs, and Swedish women. After they sucked all of his vitality, they abandoned him.
Oh yeah, you wish you had all that. Just like you elderly black people, afraid to seize an opportunity. I can't waste my time talking to you. You're a fading anachronism, and we're the woke generation.
You don't get it, do you? They see you as a savage. At least we black abstract painters had our dignity, no matter how fierce we were as competitors. And how can you call yourself a primitive outsider? I read in art news that your father is an optometrist and your mother is a school teacher. And you went to art school.
Well, the Baron's asking me to collaborate with him. That's the biggest break that's come in my career. And as for this outfit, Whit is going to introduce me as his collaborator at the press conference. So he told me to wear this for publicity.
You sure you want to collaborate with the Baron? He lives in that townhouse uptown. Seen the weird happenings, strange parties. Some are known to enter and then go missing. And whenever the Baron enters a scene, people say they hear the sound of wolves.
You're just jealous because he didn't choose you, an old school loser. But you had your chance. You old farts make me sick. Ain't nobody told you to abandon the people and do that heartless European thing.
Okay. Don't say I didn't warn you. You're nothing but a mascot to the Baron.
Young blood exits.
Another lost soul. I was naive too. Put my faith in solidarity with my fellow black painters. Look, I come from Kansas City, where we had a tradition of cooperation between black people, beginning with the Black Farmers Cooperatives. And so I was not prepared for the New York style where there was no difference between the ethics of heroin salesmen and the New York art world. Most of the Black painters were obsessed with having their work displayed in galleries or museums. And so they followed the trend set by white painters. I was there with them. And so when the Whitney announced that they were going to do a Black show, I felt that I had arrived. Jack Gray called and said that the Black painters were going to boycott the show because it was curated by a white person who didn't know our culture. A lot of the Black painters, besides me, heeded Jack's demand and withdrew their paintings. Some didn't. They crossed over the picket line. Guess who was among the ones who crossed the picket line? That's right, Jack Gray. I'll never forget the look on his face when he saw me. He just about ran into the building. He called for us to join a boycott that he violated. Shit, he wanted to be the first one, the only one. Boy, I was mad. I went to his loft. We got into a fierce argument. The solo show I was supposed to get never happened. But Jack Gray's reputation soared with me out of the way. But then he disappeared, never to be heard from again. The height of his success, he just disappeared because I killed him.
A critic called Basquiat an idiot savant. Yet Warhol's book, The Philosophy of Andy Warhol, could have been written by an idiot savant. It includes childlike cravings for food and an obsession with clothing and appearance. A character who shows up in the book frequently is his hairdresser. One critic called Basquiat Warhol's mascot. When the mascot behaved, he was rewarded. When he misbehaved, he was punished. During a trip to Milan, Warhol slapped the boy, slapped him hard, boasted about it. Warhol was upset because Basquiat received more attention in Italy than he. He was cruel to his children. Warhol had a falling out with Edie Sedgwick. When she and Bobby Dylan had a relationship, Warhol saw Sedgwick as property. He called himself a businessman. He felt like that he owned her. Basquiat rented an apartment in the building owned by Warhol. He paid $4,000 per month while maintaining residences at five-star hotels like the Ritz-Carlton. So when Basquiat wondered out loud whether he was merely a flash in the pan, Warhol wondered whether, if this was true, how would Basquiat pay the rent to Andy Warhol Enterprises? So Warhol was making money off the kid going and coming. He wasn't the only one. Over 500 clothing items which bear Basquiat's art are for sale on Etsy's.
Scene 7. Baron DeWitt and Agent Antonio Wolfe are leaving the art show. They meet Detective Mary Van Helsing.
Congratulations on the show. I thought that young blood, your collaborator, would be here. What happened?
He came down with the flu.
His work is not as impressive as Basquiat's, but it'll do. What was your contribution to the show?
Oh, my contribution, the logo for Jello. Did you enjoy it? That was my contribution.
Young blood is lucky. He's hitching on the Baron's name.
Looks to me like the Baron is the one who was benefiting. I checked your sales. Pretty low. Looks like people are tired of bat collages. And why are these art dealers making such a fuss about Youngblood's picture of Archie Moore? the former heavyweight champion of the world. They don't look like no Archie more to me. It looks like something a child could have drawn. And what's with that crown on his head? He can't spell worth a damn.
We instructed him to misspell. What would graffiti art be without bad spelling? Bad spelling is trending. Part of Youngblood's genius is being untamed, raw, and powerful.
He should be in school instead of hanging out in the village all day.
We have to go to the reception.
Is that all, detective?
You can go, but I'll be checking in with you from time to time.
Well, I am glad to cooperate, detective, but in the future, I want you to call ahead instead of just showing up.
This is not Europe, Baron. We don't recognize no titles over here. We show up anytime we wish when a kidnapping is involved.
I thought when I sailed into New York Harbor and saw the Statue of Liberty, I thought this country would be different.
But wasn't you the one who said that the Statue of Liberty had to be created by a European sculptor? Because America never produced a first-rate sculptor.
We're late. We have to get going.
The Baron and Agent Wolf exit.
I'll bet they're doing to this new child what that Andy Warhol and his band of vampires did to Jean Michel Basquiat. He was exploited by those art dealers and collectors. He thought that they were his friends. That's where this naive child went wrong. They were no friends of his. They were out to make money. The child died at 27, and they still using him like vultures competing with hyenas over a corpse. Bergdorf Goodman selling his sketches for $2,000. Louis Vuitton publishing his books. I tried to tell the precinct captain that they were giving this child heroin, but he wouldn't hear of it. He said that Warhol was not only a powerful celebrity, but owned buildings. The department has a hands-off policy when it comes to the rich, white, and powerful. I could have done something. I was like Clint Eastwood in The Line of Fire. He felt guilty because he was a Secret Service man who lost the president under his watch. But he redeemed himself by taking a bullet for another president. I failed Jean Michel, but maybe I can save this new fool.
Scene 8.
Jack Brooks, who turned himself in for the death of Jack Ray, the famed Black abstract expressionist, was convicted of manslaughter today. The judge sentenced him to 2 years in prison. Before he was led away to begin serving time, Brooks moved some of those present in the courtroom to tears as he pled his case.
Your Honor, members of the jury, members of the audience, but first of all, I want to address the members of the Gray family for my being responsible for Jack's death. It was an accident. Look, I came from a region of the country where our people were moved by the true populist attitudes. I was not prepared for the fierce competition of a few positions open to Black artists in the city of New York. That accounts for the cut and shoot attitude among Black artists. You see it in the murders that young rappers inflict upon each other. This extends to the fights over which jazz musicians will be signed for gigs and record contracts. That's what brought me into the conflict with Jack. I got tired of hiding and living among the forgotten. It's when I encountered this young artist, Youngblood, and I decided to turn myself in. You see, artists like me provide a bridge to the past. Someone who can tell the younger artists the issues and questions that confronted artists of the past so that they don't start out on zero or on a blank slate, ignorant of the past. Like Jimmy Santiago Baca and Malcolm X, I will use my time wisely, improving my skills and imparting wisdom and instruction to the untapped talent available in institutions where they may send me.
The audience was so moved by Brooks' statement that one of the hardened guards embraced him. So we know who killed Jack Gray, but who killed Jean Michel Basquiat? The decadent Warhol circle, the insults from the museums like New York's MoMA, which said that exhibiting his work would be a waste of space. The commissions that had him turning out work 24 hours per day from a patron's dungeon. The insults from whites in the United States and abroad, both from art world insiders and from those who crossed his path in everyday life. A photographer wrote, he was treated weirdly, strangely, like he was an oddity. People were entertained by him, fascinated for the moment, but would sooner or later throw him away. Or he was feared, you know, just genuinely feared. No matter where he went in the world, Basquiat was pulled over. In Paris, with guns drawn, the police asked if a woman had fallen asleep in the back seat of his car was dead. Was he killed by the critics? Basquiat stopped talking to Warhol after reading their texts. Particularly nasty, vicious, and cruel was Hilton Kramer, who wrote, he was essentially a talentless hustler, street smart, but otherwise invincibly ignorant, who used his youth, his looks, his skin color, and his abundant sex appeal to win an overnight fame that proved to be his undoing. Yet for a few vertiginous years before he died of a drug overdose in 1988, big-time art dealers were buying his work. Critics were singing his praises, and collectors, almost as ignorant about art as Basquiat himself, were outbidding each other to acquire his daubs and scribbles. The emergence of critics from colored backgrounds has rendered such white ethnocentric pronouncements obsolete. Who was the primitive? Basquiat, who drew inspiration from multiple traditions, or his white critics whose devotion to white supremacy rendered them insufficient to detect how these traditions influenced his work?
Charlene Touchette has a different point of view, which Kramer and other white critics, viewing themselves as members of the master race, failed to discern. She's an artist who lives in Santa Fe, New Mexico.
She said, not surprising that Eurocentric critics ignored the native influence on Jean Michel because they had no way of knowing that he had seen art I had shown him. And even if they did, they would have probably not have acknowledged it since they don't value anything American Indian. By the way, the Jean Michel Basquiat paintings also show the influence of contemporary Indian art on his compositional style, use of pictographic symbols, and indigenous political ideas, and his use of imagery associated with Indians like arrows, teepees, horn figures, or masks and barbed wire, signifying reservation confinement. Jean Michel and I also spoke about how he connected to his family's Indian ancestry too. Invincibly ignorant, Basquiat knew Western art and did parodies of work by the masters, not as a copycat, but as a jazz musician would take a Tin Pan Alley classic and run circles around it. But he wandered into territory that was deemed off limits to Kramer and his white supremacist posse. Basquiat knew African art as well, having traveled to Africa. Basquiat was eclectic, multicultural. Kramer was stuck in his taste, unmovable, the narrowest of Eurocentrics.
Equally cruel were Robert Hughes's comments. Like other advocates of high culture, Hughes said that whenever Blacks or women make strides, it's due to political correctness. Because Basquiat was Black. The otherwise monochrome late American art industry felt a need to refresh itself with a touch of the primitive. The reputation may survive, or it may not. If it does, it will only slow once more, as if further proof were needed that a perch in the pantheon of the 1980s does not necessarily depend on merit. Basquiat's stardom was waning badly when he died, because the fashion that had raised him up was already tired of him. Syringes flung cruelly by the zeitgeist. The only thing that brought Basquiat back into the spotlight was his death. Those who provided the research for the TV news show 60 Minutes planted this idea in Morley Safer's script. Shown with a group of Black schoolchildren at the Whitney Museum of American Art's retrospective of Jean Michel Basquiat's work, Mr. Safer asks, "Do you think you could do as well?" "Yeah," responds one of the children. "I could do better than that." Of Basquiat as an artist, Mr. Safer explained to viewers that in 1988, when his popularity was declining, his career was saved. He died of a drug overdose, and now that there would be no more Basquiats, the market fell in love with him all over again.
Vivian Rayner published her review in the New York Times of a 1985 gallery exhibit of Warhol-Basquiat collaborative works, stating in an almost racist tone, "Last year, I wrote of Jean Michel Basquiat that he had a chance of becoming a very good painter, providing he didn't succumb to the forces that would make him an art world mascot." Basquiat stopped talking to Warhol after reading the criticism. Basquiat sank to the depths of depression for which the only palliatives were drugs. Others complained that Warhol exploited them. Ultraviolet writes, "Yes, I have gone through many dangers, tolls, and snares. I've been brought safe I feel to tell the story, to tell about the psychological and sociological devastation, the errant activities, the public sex, the hedonism in Excelsis, the anything goes films, in which performers are stoned on drugs. Then to make it worse, we exposed our exploits before young students and encouraged them to get as stoned as our performers. Even though for me, sexual immortality was but the despairing side of the search for emotional security, I have to acknowledge that I participated in a movement that helped lay the basis for the explosion of hardcore pornography, drug pestilence, and the AIDS plague. Most of us have paid a heavy price, some with our lives, some with our health, others years squandered. I feel I was luckier than most, for in the 70s, when death brushed me, I repented and found my way to inner peace. Was Basquiat one of those young people who was harmed by his association with Warhol? Those who posed as his friends exploited him in a different way. Filmmaker Jim Jarmusch explained why he refused to see Julian Schnabel's film about Basquiat. "I knew Jean Michel, and he was not friends with Julian. I like Julian very much. He's a very generous guy, even if he is an egotistical character. I refused to talk to Schnabel about Jean Michel when he was making the film, but Jean Michel was not a fan of Schnabel as a person back then, and I would not betray him in that way. Basquiat's woman companion, Paige Powell, says that Basquiat ridiculed Schnabel's work. In the Schnabel film, Paige Powell is depicted as an innocent who martyred herself on behalf of a crazy, unreliable, so unreliable that he stood up an art dealer who was receiving a 50% commission on each painting she sold. She is serving time for tax fraud. In her own account, Paige Powell said that she was right there with Basquiat doing cocaine and heroin. Schnabel's film Basquiat should have been called the Schnabel Home Movie. It shows that those who pretended to admire him could just be as insensitive about the painter as Kramer, Rayner, and Hughes. Schnabel, who boasted that he was as close to Picasso as we're likely to get, becomes Basquiat in a twisted way. Since Basquiat's father didn't grant him permission to use the originals in the film, Schnabel painted Basquiat imitations. Schnabel's own paintings appear in the film as much as Basquiat imitations. He is all over the place, including contributing to a song in a soundtrack marred by white men straining to sound like Negroes. All of Schnabel's interests are brought to bear in Basquiat. Rayner wrote, "The baronial interior of his home appears as Milo's domicile. There are cameos by his parents, his daughters, and his second wife, most of them as Milo's relatives. And while Schnabel doesn't actually appear in the movie himself, the scene of Basquiat and Warhol's collaboration at the factory has as backdrop several silkscreen paintings that depict Schnabel as a young, lean man. Paintings that Warhol never made."
So Schnabel's producing and directing a film about Basquiat, given that Schnabel and Basquiat were rivals, is what it would have been like if Joe Frazier had produced and directed a film about Muhammad Ali. It shows. Basquiat is shown as a junkie stumbling around New York, living in a cardboard box, yet Charlene Touchette says that he had jobs. A downtown Tribeca clubhouse movie, the most telling scene, comes when Basquiat enters Schnabel's home. Schnabel gives him an update about his success, while Basquiat, his reputation as a hot painter on the decline, listens. In the film, when he meets with his former girlfriend, who is now working for a guy who hit on her while she was with Basquiat, about 5 minutes is spent on Basquiat picking at a pimple. Basquiat draws a portrait of Schnabel's daughter. Milo picks it up and uses it to put Basquiat down, saying to her, "You're prettier than that." Schnabel has a family. Basquiat doesn't. After the visit, Basquiat urinates in Schnabel's stairwell, and in an interview with Charlie Rose, describes this as Basquiat marking territory. A curious way of putting it, because scent marking, in this case using the smell of urine to mark territory, is what animals do. Reminds one the scene in Critical Condition, a film starring Richard Pryor during his decline. In one scene, Pryor plays a dog who urinates on a man's leg. Throughout the Schnabel film, surfers are shown. Couldn't part of the budget have been spent on showing a scene in Hawaii? Because before returning to New York, Basquiat was drug-free while living there. He said, "New York is killing me."
Warhol returned to his religious origins after being shot by Valery Solanas. The Greek church is gravely serious about icons. For this church, icons are windows on heaven. Was the shooting a warning from God that Warhol had substituted the icons of capitalism for those of saints? And why the images having to do with mobility? Pegasus, Pontiac, Mercedes, Mobil Oil, all having to do with Warhol subconsciously realizing how far he had traveled from the church. Were these saints of capitalism false idols? Substitutions for the real saints? And that by inserting a motorcycle in Warhol's take on Leonardo da Vinci's Last Supper, a sign that he returned home? Or was the sexually ambiguous individual sitting next to Jesus the image that got his attention? Warhol was attracted to sexual ambiguity. Or was it the eel that appears on the menu? The eel totem fits Warhol. Deceptive, mistaken for a snake, it is actually a fish. A surrealist gag. The eel has expensive tastes, like the eel prefers trout and doesn't settle for rock cod. But like Duchamp and his follower, Warhol, the eel is a scavenger, profiting from ideas of others, plagiarizing. Was his painting, The Virgin and Child, a way of asking forgiveness for substituting Marilyn Monroe for the Madonna? Around the factory, Warhol was called the Pope Father. He was given church monikers.
Basquiat was encouraged to inject himself with heroin and snort cocaine in order to increase production, which was the practice of slave masters, giving the slaves cocaine for the same purpose, like one would inject a horse with Lasix to improve its performance. The slave mistresses became coke addicts in order to tolerate their husbands carrying on with their favorite sexual partners among the slave women, some of whom walked around brazenly wearing their jewelry. He traveled to Hawaii one last time. During his last night on the island, he dreamed about Richard Pryor.
Critics use the blood metaphor when discussing the Warhol and Basquiat relationship. Basquiat was new blood for Warhol, which invites a discussion of vampirism. They had a falling out after the 1985 Tony Shafrazi gallery show featuring their collaboration drew criticism, much of it cruel. Was Basquiat exploited? One of his girlfriends was able to tell which drug influenced which painting, whether it was cocaine or heroin. He turned to heroin after cocaine use created a hole in his nose. Except for Page, nobody seemed to care as long as he was producing art from which others benefited. He had to paint around the clock in order to fulfill commissions. And so, when Basquiat was broke, he sold his body for $10 a pop. In the end, did he sell his soul? He was no longer the enfant terrible who would sell a postcard for 65 cents to purchase a package of cigarettes, which would be resold by the buyer for $1,000. Warhol said that at one point, Basquiat played for the market. Most of the white critics regarded Basquiat as a graffiti artist who benefited from his relationship with Warhol. Others say that Basquiat resurrected Warhol. Basquiat got Warhol to paint again, which he had abandoned 20 years before their meeting. Now, Basquiat's work is worth more than Warhol's. The price of a framed Campbell soup can signed by Warhol has been reduced by 65%. Basquiat was like Ota Benga to Warhol and his circle. Ota Benga was the pygmy who was placed in the Bronx Zoo because they couldn't determine whether he was human. When Basquiat was in trouble with drugs, Basquiat's girlfriend Paige tried to get Warhol to intervene. He answered the urgent call for intervention with another quip. Maybe, he said, Basquiat wanted to be the first one to go out early. An execrable graphics novel by Julian Volage and Soren Mosdell called Basquiat shows that the hatred of Basquiat hasn't subsided. Published in 2019, 31 years after his death, from the first page, which shows Basquiat in his shorts laying on a bed surrounded by drug paraphernalia, to the last page, which shows that same view, Basquiat is shown as a violent, crazed, angry individual who is so hard to handle that he drives his mother to a mental institution, a thief who robs elderly white women and abuses his white lovers. Only when he snorts coke does he become a monster and is able to paint. While the facial expressions of whites are calm, Basquiat is shown throwing tantrums and his eyes doing wild things. Very little about his art. The preponderance of the drawings show undressed white women with Basquiat getting high. He's even shown handcuffed to a bed presided over by a dominatrix. Like the imperialist who shat on a Haitian flag, Volage substitutes Basquiat's art for his own, which is crude and stupid.
Scene 9. Detective Mary Van Helsing with mop and pail.
Who are you?
I'm the new cleaning lady.
It's 1 o'clock in the morning. Aren't you supposed to come during the day?
Me working the night shift. I think that the employment agency told you.
Very well, but don't throw anything out. And don't into the basement. Now, if you will excuse me, I have errands.
Now let me find out what he's hiding in the basement.
Detective Van Helsing goes off stage and returns with a very thin Jennifer Blue.
But he told me that he loved me and that I could live forever.
You dumb bitch. That man don't love nobody but himself.
But he left 2 punctures on my neck. He says that in Bavaria, this is a sign of affection.
He had you down there sleeping in a coffin. Didn't you think that was odd?
He said he and I were rehearsing for a performance piece.
Jennifer faints.
Better get an ambulance over here. Got a girl here, she's lost a lot of blood.
Young blood appears, still in a jockstrap and bicycle helmet, dazed, sleepy.
Where's the Baron?
Boy, go put some clothes on. What's wrong with you?
Detective Van Helsing pushes young blood off the stage. 2 paramedics come and carry Jennifer Blue out on a stretcher. Detective Van Helsing speaks to the paramedics.
My blood type is O if you need some. Boy, this art world is not the way it used to be. Somebody just sold a bottle of ketchup for $4 million just because it had some famous artist's name on it. Something that you can buy in a grocery store for $2. They didn't tell the 5-year-old that about it, and so he was using it on a hamburger and he dropped it. Boy, this art world is really not like it used to be. We sure have come a long way from Jacob Lawrence, Charles White, and Norman Rockwell, my favorite.
Young blood returns with clothes on.
Now, that's more like it. Now, why didn't you show up for the show, which featured your collaboration?
He locked me in. He said that nobody had ever heard of me and that he was the one that was important. They kept feeding me some black stuff, like fish eggs or something. They had me working 24 hours turning out paintings. They gave me cocaine to keep me awake. I need to go to Taco Bell.
Looks like to me you did all of the collaborating.
Yeah, he'd put some famous logo in a painting like GM for General Motors and then ordered me to do the rest. And then he would disappear and come home shortly before dawn.
Key heard turning in the lock.
That's him. What's taking him so long?
I had the locks changed.
Baron's shouts are heard. He bangs on the door.
Open the door.
Young blood goes to
open the door.
Young blood goes to open the door.
Don't you open that door.
Help! I'm locked out. Somebody open the door.
But
you heard me.
No.
You heard me. You saying right where you are. As I always say, sunlight is the best disinfectant.
Help!
But that's my mentor.
No.
Boy, if you open that door, I'll smack your face.
Young blood retreats.
Go get your things. I'm taking you out of here.
Loud knocking. Detective Van Helsing opens the door to see Agent Antonio Wolf standing there.
Well, if it isn't Mr. Antonio Wolf,
Where's the Baron?
you're standing in him.
Detective Van Helsing shuts the door.
Yes, he took off.
Detective Van Helsing leads young blood by the hand.
Now step over that pile of dust outside the door respectfully. After all, it was once a baron.
Scene 10. Basquiat dreams of Richard Pryor.
Jean, Richard here. I can see why you would want to sojourn in Hawaii. I had a house there in Maui. I go there to get away from people like NBC censoring me. People leaning on me to give them money. Pay their way. Women pestering me. This one woman said she was pregnant with me and I had to pay her $600,000. Shit. This woman, Jennifer, she made me beat her up. I swear to God, she made me beat her up and then she had the nerve to sue me. She made me shoot up that car. Then there was Hollywood, depriving me of all the roles like I wanted in Blazing Saddles. They chose Cleavon Little. All these shitty movies they made me do, I'll admit it. Like the one that came out last year, Critical Condition. The critic, Janet Maslin, said that I looked haggard and agitated in that film. And she was on to something because I was shoveling all this white lady up my nose. And that's why I looked all shriveled up. Then the Washington Post said I looked emaciated. And the makeup couldn't hide where they had grafted my skin on my neck. Then the boss come into my trailer, cussing at me, hurting my feelings. He said, Richard, we're losing all this money doing takes because you come in here so high that you don't remember your lines. And then you take all these coke breaks. Our budget is triple because of you. Now, if you black actors can't get it together, we're going to have to bring in some backups, some African and British actors. They're disciplined. They studied at the Royal Academy and they won't make demands because they're glad to be here. And unlike you, they don't come to the set brandishing weapons. One of them said that she's so happy when she goes to the grocery store. There was a choice between a variety of things that she can't buy in Africa. She had just burst into tears. Unlike you, seasoned blacks, people, they are innocent. One of them placed teaspoons of cocaine in her tea. She thought it was sugar. Now you told us to kiss your black rich ass. Well, before it's all over, Richard, you might be kissing our rich white ass. Now that one didn't change my attitude. You would think I would have learned my lesson after I got caught up on fire while freebasing. I was on fire like one of them Buddhist monks. Now Jennifer made me do that. I gotten sucked in by the Hollywood wall-to-wall sex. It's like I was on a planet called Vagina. And I'm the only inhabitant exploring every nookie and cranny. It's like I was a moon rover. But I never blew a hole in my nose like you did. Both me and you, we wanted to get over. We wanted to make it big. Like I told Ishmael Reed, I want to get over. That was that time in Berkeley, early 70s. You might call that my graffiti period. I was my most creative. You were scribbling while you were scribbling graffiti on the walls of the Lower East Side. I was speaking graffiti at small clubs in Berkeley and San Francisco. Happiest time of my life. I hung out with Cecil Brown, Ishmael Reed, Claude Brown, and activists like Huey Newton. Reed and Brown told me I couldn't bring my corny Las Vegas routine to Berkeley. Well, they went into a brutal, cutting-edge comic aggression. Hell, shit, I was set free. I had no restrictions. But like you, I wasn't satisfied just doing small clubs, honing my craft. So I abandoned that scene. Hollywood put restrictions on my art, but they gave me so much money. I couldn't refuse. And you fell into the clutches of Andy Warhol and his cult. He not only signed his name on supermarket products, but he signed his name on his workers. Because they were no different from the inanimate objects to him. He signed his name on your ass, like someone would brand a motherfucking cow. He took advantage of you, Jean, like you was his toy, like that movie. Where I played the white man's toy, one of the many shitty movies they made me do. All of these dopey scripts they put in front of me. How do I deal with this fame? A straight-jacketed fame? These producers told me where I could eat, where I could even take a shit. And I did like you. Shovel mountains of white lady. Like you, I started moving with the Caviar crowd. Don't be like me, Jean. Stay away from white lady who made me her slave. Fucked up my health. Hollywood is killing me. Don't let New York kill you. Those people have gotten everything out of you, sucked you dry. Go home to your father's ancestors, Jean Michel. It's too late for me, but not for you.
But suppose that Richard's intervention, coming in the form of a dream, had actually happened. Instead of returning to his killer, New York, to be finished off, Basquiat took Richard of the Dream's advice. Suppose that in 1988, he left from Maui and went to the land of his father's ancestors, Haiti, the city of Jacmel, a city surrounded by blue pools fed by waterfalls, a scene of lush vegetation, where Raymond-les-Bains is a popular beach. Suppose that he would have restored an abandoned chateau built in the 1700s, that once a week he would go into town to buy groceries and a bottle of rum, make papier-mâché masks for carnival, sometimes joining the carnival. No art dealers, patrons, buyers, critics to bother him, to work him to death. Instead, admiring townspeople, very respectful of his privacy. He would have survived. He would be 60 years old.
Curtain, you have just seen a reading of The Slave Who Loved Caviar, a new play by Ishmael Reed, directed by Rome Neal, assistant director Carla Blank, video production by Miles Chibar, original music composed and performed by Ishmael Reed, tolls for Basquiat and Barrel House Basquiat, Ishmael Reed's Jacket by Grace Wales Bonner, performed by Malika Iman as Detective Mary Van Helsing, Ishmael Reed as Baron DeWitt, Robert Mailer Anderson as Agent Antonio Wolf, Brian Simmons as Young Blood, Rome Neal as Jack Brooks, Monisha Shiva as Announcer 2 and Jennifer Blue, Laura Robards as Announcer 1, Maurice Carlton as Richard Pryor, Tennessee Reed as narrator. All donations will go to a full production.